Good evening, you're watching London Live News at 6 with Alicia Edwards as we continue our special coverage during the 10 days of mourning the Queen. Entry to the queue paused after reaching wait times of 14 hours this morning. As London prepares for the Queen's state funeral on Monday, updates on the plans for the transport network in the capital. First, the public queue to attend the Queen's lying in state was paused for much of the day after reaching capacity this morning. Mourners were warned by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport not to attempt to join the queue at Southwark Park for at least 12 hours. It has now reopened. The call was made as the official estimate for queuing time reached at least 14 hours, with people waiting through the night to witness the lying in state. The queue had grown to almost 5 miles long this morning. We'll have more on that later in the programme as we hear from one of those involved in the plans. More than 30 arrests have been made so far as part of the biggest policing operation in the Met's history in the lead-up to the Queen's funeral. Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy said that 34 people had been arrested for a range of offences, but described this as relatively few. He said people should speak to officers if they do see anything of concern on Monday.
Whilst the Met Police is well versed at supporting policing ceremonial events and other major events in London, there is absolutely nothing that can compare to the scale and complexity of our policing operation. Not just that we've already undertaken this week, but as we build up to the state funeral on Monday, this will be the single largest policing operation that the Met Police has ever undertaken, and I think is ever likely to undertake. So our policing operation, first and foremost, is there to ensure the safety and security of the state funeral, as well as those that are coming to London to pay their respects and remember Her Majesty the Queen. Officers will be engaged in the crowd, and my ask of anybody coming to London is that if you see anything of concern, please speak to one of the many officers that will be on duty.
There we are, Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy there ahead of Monday. Now, the King made his first visit to Wales as monarch today alongside the Queen Consort. They arrived by helicopter, then travelled by state limousine to a service at Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff, the final stop in his tour of the 4 home nations. A booming gun salute fired from Cardiff Castle, which was heard across the city when the King and Queen Consort arrived in the Welsh capital. First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, and Prime Minister Liz Truss attended the service, which saw Andrew John, Archbishop of Wales, highlight the late monarch's ability to utilise soft power and said we would never look at a jar of marmalade in the same way again. On leaving the cathedral, King Charles III and the Queen Consort were presented with flowers and went on to meet many well-wishers who were waving flags and clearly very pleased to meet the new monarch. Well, also busy today, the Prince and Princess of Wales have been visiting the Army Training Centre Pirbright to meet with troops from the Commonwealth who have been deployed to the UK to take part in the state funeral. At 7:30 this evening, a vigil is to be mounted by the King and the Queen's other children at Westminster Hall. All will be in military uniform, including Prince Andrew, who, as a non-working royal, has been granted dispensation to wear uniform. 8 of the Queen's grandchildren will also stand vigil tomorrow night. The Duke of Sussex will also wear his uniform, a decision made by his father, royal sources have said. The Prince of Wales will stand at the head and the Duke of Sussex at the foot. The other grandchildren will be in mourning suits and dark formal dresses with decorations. The grandchildren, at the King's invitation, are said to be very keen to pay their respects, just as their parents are doing so this evening. Well, looking ahead to the rest of the weekend, tomorrow the King will meet the Chiefs of Staff at Buckingham Palace before visiting police headquarters to thank representatives from all the emergency services involved in the planning and delivery of events during this period. Later, the King and Queen Consort will attend a lunch for Governors General and then meet realm Prime Ministers at Buckingham Palace. On Sunday, the King and Queen Consort will host heads of state and official overseas guests at the palace in what the King's spokesman described as an official state event. Looking ahead to Monday now, 3 central London tube stations will be closed on the morning of the Queen's funeral to prevent overcrowding. Transport for London have announced that passengers will be prevented from starting or ending journeys at Westminster, St James's Park and Hyde Park Corner stations for most of the morning on Monday. The transport body said it will aim to reopen stations after the funeral at Westminster Abbey to help people leaving the Westminster area. Green Park Station will be exit only between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. A number of buses in central London will also be diverted due to road closures, and London Victoria Coach Station will be closed. TfL have advised the best option for passengers arriving at mainline railway stations will be to continue their journey on foot rather than use public transport. London's Transport Commissioner Andy Byford said it is going to be extremely busy in London on Monday, and there will be short notice changes and queues to enter stations as a result of the large number of people travelling.
This is one of the biggest events in TfL history. When His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh died, obviously we had a lot of people come to London then, but the event was during COVID and was out at Windsor Castle. So the best comparator, I guess, would be the Olympics, which again attracted huge numbers of people. But the big difference was we knew what was happening when, and they were largely ticketed events, nearly all ticketed events, so you knew exactly what you were coping with. Here, who knows how many people will come. There's different estimates, but we're certainly expecting around 1 million people in and around central London on the day of the funeral itself. So we've got to be prepared, and we are.
TfL also announced that buses will pull over if it is safe and practical to do so and switch off their engines during the 1-minute silence on Sunday at 8 p.m. and the 2-minute silence on Monday at around 11:55 a.m. Road closures and bus diversions will continue well into next week as the removal of barriers and other event infrastructure is expected to take several days. Heathrow is also making schedule changes on Monday. More than 100 flights will be cancelled to prevent aircraft noise disturbing proceedings at Westminster Abbey and at Windsor Castle. The West London Airport announced that 15% of its 1,200 flights due to take off or land on Monday will be disrupted. British Airways, the most affected airline, will cancel 100 short-haul flights due to the restrictions. Virgin Atlantic said it will cancel 4 flights. A ban on planes flying below a certain altitude over central London has also been extended until the end of Monday for the funeral. The Civil Aviation Authority said the ban has been enforced as part of wider security arrangements and applies to aircraft, including personal jets, small balloons, kites and parachutes. So, as we look ahead to Monday, a reminder of the plans for the day. At 6:30 a.m, doors will close to the public for the Queen's lying in state in Westminster Hall. Following this, at 8 a.m, the doors of Westminster Abbey will open to the congregation to take their seats for the state funeral service. Just after 10:35, a bearer party will lift the coffin and carry it in procession from Westminster Hall to the Royal Navy's State Gun Carriage, which will set off at 10:44 a.m. The King, members of the royal family, members of the King's household and the household of the Prince of Wales will follow the coffin. At 10:52 a.m, the procession will arrive at the gate of Westminster Abbey, where the bearer party will lift the coffin from the state gun carriage and carry it inside for the state funeral service. The service will begin at 11 a.m. inside Westminster Abbey. The service is expected to last 1 hour, and then a procession will set off at 12:15 p.m. to Wellington Arch, arriving at 1 o'clock. The state hearse and the royal family will then travel to Windsor, where a committal service will take place at 4 p.m. in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. A private burial service will take place at 7:30 p.m. Also a busy weekend for the Prime Minister. Liz Truss is to meet a number of world leaders, including US President Joe Biden and Canada's PM Justin Trudeau on Sunday. She will meet privately with her counterparts from Australia and New Zealand tomorrow. Liz Truss has met President Biden as Foreign Secretary, but this will be their first meeting since she became Prime Minister. Now, let's take a look at the weather. It's good news for anyone planning to spend their weekend in the queue. There is no rain on the radar. It is dropping as low as 8 degrees overnight though. But a sunny start to the day tomorrow and highs of 17 degrees in the afternoon. Looking ahead to Sunday, highs of 17 again, but there is more cloud cover making an appearance. And on Monday, it's much the same, cloudy all day, but a couple of degrees warmer, reaching highs of 19 degrees. Well, it is looking like it's going to get rather chilly for some of those waiting in the queue. But some have made time go by with a little bit of celebrity spotting. David Beckham was seen in the queue today and reportedly caused crowds to forget to move on. Also spotted were Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby paying their respects, as well as Sharon Osbourne joining the thousands of others mourning the loss of the Queen. We're heading to a short break, but we'll be back with more coverage following the death of the Queen in just a few minutes' time.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to the show as we continue our special coverage of the 10 days of mourning after the death of the Queen. We'll be speaking to Nick Durston, who is the Chief Executive of the South Bank Employers Group, as thousands spend the night there in the queue. But first, let's just bring you some other news from across the capital today. 2 police officers were stabbed early this morning in central London, the Metropolitan Police has said. Scotland Yard said 2 officers were attacked by a man in the Leicester Square area at around 6 a.m. The suspect was arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and assaulting an emergency worker. Sadiq Khan condemned the attack and called for anyone with information about the incident to contact the police.
So we've had a tragic stabbing of 2 of our police officers in central London this morning, and our investigation has commenced. A man has been arrested and a knife recovered. There is nothing to suggest that this is linked to terror attack or linked to the events surrounding the death of Her Majesty the Queen. My thoughts are with those officers, those brave officers, their family and their colleagues, and we will be doing a comprehensive investigation.
Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy there. Now, a criminal who killed a young man in a crash in East London has been jailed for 24 years thanks to an uncanny witness sketch. 44-year-old Danny Smith from Chigwell smashed into a motorcycle being ridden by Salim Ahmed as he tried to overtake 2 cars in Hainault Road in Redbridge in December last year. A witness had seen Smith, who had been driving erratically for 30 minutes prior to the collision, and drew a crucial sketch which identified him. The Metropolitan Police say he has been jailed for 24 years at Snaresbrook Crown Court. COVID-19 infections in the UK have dropped to their lowest level for nearly a year. Close to 900,000 people in private households are estimated to have had coronavirus in the week to the 5th of September, according to the Office for National Statistics. Infections are estimated to have fallen in London and the southeast of England, while in other regions the trend is uncertain. Now, the queue we've all been fixated on this week to see the Queen's lying in state runs behind the London Eye, through Jubilee Gardens and onto the South Bank, where it follows the River Thames. The South Bank itself has historic significance in relation to the Queen when it comes to commemorating her life. And Nick Durston is the Chief Executive of SBEG and the South Bank and came in to tell me more.
So we as South Bank Employers Group have worked with all the major landowners and businesses on the South Bank to enact that plan, but we've also obviously been working very closely with DCMS, with the Mayor and his team, and Lambeth Council and Southwark Council. So it's a huge partnership collaboration, but it was instantaneous because the plan was there, ready to go in terms of what we needed to have in place in order to ensure that the queue could be well managed in a way that was appropriate for what obviously is a very important and solemn occasion.
Speaking of which, how long beforehand were you aware of what there was in place? How involved were you in that process?
We've been in discussion with DCMS, the government department who's leading all this for several years, it's fair to say. A lot of that obviously has been completely confidential, but planning requires all agencies to be ready to ensure that we were able to put a plan in action as soon as possible. So there's been close liaison, close coordination, which is essential for something of this size.
How do you prepare for something of this scale, and has it gone the way that you'd anticipated that it would?
Well, preparation is everything. So the South Bank is characterised by some amazing organisations, obviously several of them national and international in terms of their purpose and their reputation. The National Theatre, the South Bank Centre, the British Film Institute, but also a lot of it is owned by charities. So Queen Street Community Builders own a lot of South Bank, and Jubilee Gardens, which is the green space next to the London Eye, is owned by Jubilee Gardens Trust, a charity. So what we do is work with all of those organisations to ensure that the coordination and the planning is as good as it can be, and crucially it's all about them working with government agencies, the local councils, the police and a whole host of other organisations to ensure that everyone understands what needs to happen literally from day one. So we had teams on the ground, obviously reporting in just how the queue was forming. Obviously, people started to queue before the official announcement, so we obviously needed to be mindful that there was going to be an official announcement on Tuesday night, which there was, but we were very prepared. I think it's fair to say that an event of this size and this scale, inevitably has had its testing moments, but everyone has been really clear about how to deal with those, how to address those, feeding back, into the relevant agencies, but also just being able to sort of do things absolutely in the moment, talking to people in the crowd, encouraging people to be in a place that doesn't interfere with the normal flow of people who aren't necessarily queuing. So there's a very kind of human side to managing this at what is obviously a very sensitive time for everyone.
Yeah, lots of stories coming from people in the queue saying that kind of sense of coming together is really there. You speak of some of the unprecedented things that can happen. Obviously today the queue has reached capacity. Were you prepared for this? Were you expecting this to happen?
Yes, I think that's been an eventuality that, given the outpouring of emotion and feeling that the nation has showed, this was a very clear possibility. Obviously there are some very practical aspects to that. So one of the key things is that those cultural organisations that I mentioned earlier have been open 24 hours. So they've been providing refreshments, soft drinks for people who obviously have been queuing for a long time. And I think this is obviously a real concern. It's at that point on the South Bank, people will have been queuing for many hours, often overnight. So people do need, those refreshments. People obviously need to be helped, if people are feeling unwell or people are feeling, that things are getting too much. So along that queue, there are obviously stewards, but there are also representatives of those organisations who are there to help, to be able to ensure that emergency services have easy access in case of, people who are really uncomfortable. So it's a major operation, but we're confident that we'll be able to manage for the next two days. Obviously the weekend is going to be busy, but yeah, people are going to be obviously queuing for a very long time given the numbers.
Yeah, lots of support there. Speaking of, the history of the South Bank itself and lots of connections to the Queen. Absolutely,
and it's a history of connections that go right back to 1951, actually, when she was Princess Elizabeth, with the Festival of Britain, this amazing festival that brought the nation together after the war. So she attended the festival, she opened the Royal Festival Hall, she laid the foundation stone for the National Theatre on the Festival of Britain's site. So yeah, long association, and really for 70 years the Queen has had this connection to the South Bank. She's been a patron of the National Theatre for 4 decades, been a patron of the South Bank Centre, opened not just the Royal Festival Hall but also the Queen Elizabeth Hall, which obviously is named in her honour, and the Purcell Room and the Hayward Gallery. She opened Jubilee Gardens in 1977 and then revisited them in her Diamond Jubilee in 2012 after a major transformation project that was led by the Jubilee Gardens Trust, and also came to the BFI in that same year as well. So a strong connection. The Queen's Walk was opened in her honour in '77, and then was extended. So Coin Street Community Builders hosted her in 1988 when the Queen's Walk was extended. So right the way through, I think her last official visit was in 2014 when she opened the new building for Ballet Rambert on Upper Ground in South Bank.
Were you there? Did your role allow you to be there?
I wasn't. I started just the year after. So I've met the Queen on a prior occasion, but not in my current role. So and it was a great honour to do that over in West London, actually.
Amazing to have met the Queen yourself. Can you tell me any more about that experience?
Oh yes, well, when I was working for an organisation called the Westway Development Trust, and she came to mark the silver anniversary of a Caribbean elders group called Pepper Potts. So that was the occasion when I met her.
There we are, Nick Durston there, the Chief Executive of the South Bank Employers Group. Now, just before we go to the break, a little history lesson on a royal dish still found in supermarkets, at picnics and parties today. That's right, coronation chicken, the dish created for Her Majesty 70 years ago. Coronation chicken, the dish created to feed 350 foreign dignitaries after the service at Westminster Abbey. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II took place on the 2nd of June 1953, and the recipe consists of 2 roasting chickens, peppercorns and curry sauce, seen here in a copy of the original cookbook, the Constance Spry Cookery Book. Angela Wood was 18 when she helped to create the dish, and she returned to make it for the Queen at Sandringham earlier this year to mark the Jubilee. She was told it still makes regular appearances at the palace.
Probably quite different, because nowadays we do things quite differently.
They do slightly different.
Because in those days, just after rationing, it was, yes. So there was very little imported food of any sort.
Still a staple sandwich filler many years on, the dish was served at Jubilee celebrations across the country earlier this year. There we are, lovely pictures there of Angela and the Queen just months ago as part of the Jubilee celebrations. It's time for a break now, but when we return, we'll have more coverage following the death of Her Majesty the Queen.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back. You're watching our special coverage following the death of the Queen. The public queue to attend the Queen's lying in state was paused for much of the day after reaching capacity. Mourners were warned by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport not to attempt to join the queue at Southwark Park for at least 6 hours. It has now reopened. The call was made as the official estimate for queuing time reached at least 14 hours, with people waiting through the night to witness the lying in state. The queue had grown to almost 5 miles long this morning. We'll have more on that later in the programme as we hear from one of those involved in the plans. More than 30 arrests have been made so far as part of the biggest policing operation in the Met's history in the lead up to the Queen's funeral. Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy said that 34 people had been arrested for a range of offences, but described this as relatively few. He said people should speak to officers if they do see anything of concern on Monday.
Whilst the Met Police is well versed at supporting policing ceremonial events and other major events in London, there is absolutely nothing that can compare to the scale and complexity of our policing operation. Not just that we've already undertaken this week, but as we build up to the state funeral on Monday, this will be the single largest policing operation that the Met Police has ever undertaken, and I think is ever likely to undertake. So our policing operation, first and foremost, is there to ensure the safety and security of the state funeral, as well as those that are coming to London to pay their respects and remember Her Majesty the Queen. Officers will be engaging the crowd, and my ask of anybody coming to London is that if you see anything of concern, please speak to one of the many officers that will be on duty.
There we are, Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy there ahead of Monday. Now, the King made his first visit to Wales as monarch today alongside the Queen Consort. They arrived by helicopter, then travelled by state limousine to a service at Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff, the final stop in his tour of the 4 home nations. A booming gun salute fired from Cardiff Castle, which was heard across the city when the King and Queen Consort arrived in the Welsh capital. First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, and Prime Minister Liz Truss attended the service, which saw Andrew John, Archbishop of Wales, highlight the late monarch's ability to utilise soft power and said we would never look at a jar of marmalade in the same way again. On leaving the cathedral, King Charles III and the Queen Consort were presented with flowers and went on to meet many well-wishers who were waving flags and clearly very pleased to meet the new monarch. ahead of the Queen's funeral on Monday. Hebe spoke to retired Lieutenant Colonel Graham Jones, who was a Senior Director of Music for the Household Division. With this appointment came the responsibility for planning, coordinating and delivering the music for all state ceremonial events, including state funerals and the Queen's birthday, giving him specialised knowledge and personal experience into the preparation for funerals. Here's what he told Hebe about the preparation for this event.
So I spent 40 years in the military. I enlisted as a musician, and then eventually was promoted and commissioned and became the Director of Music of the Coldstream Guards, and then finally the Director of Music of the Household Division, the Senior Director of Music of the Household Division, responsible for delivering all the state ceremonial music. So that's things like events like the Queen's Birthday Parade, Armistice Day at the Cenotaph, for Remembrance Day, and state opening of Parliament, and of course the preparation and planning for all other events that may occur within state ceremonial.
So you were involved in the planning, coordinating and delivering the music. Tell us more about some of the events you inputted in. You know, I read that you were involved with the Queen Mother's funeral. Yes,
I was involved in the Queen Mother's funeral, but at that particular juncture, I wasn't the Senior Director of Music. I was the Director of Music of the Coldstream Guards. So I was commanding my own band. So I was the officer commanding the Coldstream Guards band. And as such, I had a part to play in that particular funeral. And I led the streetliners down the Mall, and the band was at the Duke of York Steps. And we played solemn music to the waiting crowds to basically set the tone for the procession that was about to follow.
Tell us a little bit more about how ceremonies like this are planned. In terms of turning it around, when would they have started to prepare for Monday?
All state ceremonial funerals are planned well in advance, and it's kind of like a tweaking process. If you go back in history to Queen Victoria's funerals in 1901, and that's the first time we had military bands as we know them today. And so the planning started there, and then of course we had another 3 state funerals with the 3 kings, and so it built upon that. And then of course we had Winston Churchill and his state funeral as well. So all the planning is come from a rich vein of a golden thread, in fact, of history, heritage and tradition, which has brought us to where we are today. So all the planning is there in process, so everything's written down. What's key to this is delivery. So you have to deliver the plan. Right? There's an action plan there that needs to be delivered. So what we do is immediately on Friday, what would have been happening is all the music would have been distributed out to all the bands so that they could go away and start to practice.
That leads me on to my next question, which is tell us a bit more about how the music is selected and brought to life.
I think the music is selected, and as I said, it's been built up over the years in the selection process. And the music, obviously, it's going to be funereal music, and it's going to be funeral music that can be marched to at the right pace for the procession. So it's all there. So the selection isn't really the issue. It's the delivery, and it's the preparation of making sure that the bands are performing those pieces of music to the highest possible standard, representing the nation who are mourning the death of our beloved Queen.
What's your reflection on the last few days and the processions and everything that we've seen? How has it made you feel watching it and reflecting on your input over the last 40 years?
I think firstly proud at the sheer quality and standard of delivery. We are the envy of the world when it comes to delivering state ceremonial. And there's no bigger state ceremonial event than that of a state ceremonial funeral. And so I've been watching all these events and just marveling at the sheer high standard of everything, whether it's from the servicemen who are performing their drill, or whether it's the musicians also doing their drill, but also performing at the very highest level. And I commend them for what they've done so far.
There we are, retired Lieutenant Colonel Graham Jones there on what we can expect on Monday. We're going to a break now, but our special coverage continues in just a few moments.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Hello there, welcome back. A newly commissioned sculpture of Queen Elizabeth II by British figurative artist Kezia Burt has been put on display at the National Army Museum. Alongside this will be a book of condolences for visitors commemorating the Queen and her years of dedication and service. The bust will also be displayed throughout Chelsea History Festival, which will run from next week on the 20th to the 25th of September, with a programme including talks reflecting on the extraordinary life of the Queen and the history of the British monarchy, hosted by the National Army Museum, Royal Hospital Chelsea and Chelsea Physic Garden.
The sculpture I was commissioned to do by the National Army Museum was actually a celebration for the Platinum Jubilee. It was started as a ceramic, so a clay sculpture, and then we've taken it to get moulded and now cast in bronze. As a resident artist, I was there for the whole week, so I had lots of people coming in and talking to me about the process. I was talking them all through it on a daily basis, which was great. The actual process is essentially you get the centerline profile like doing a penny, essentially, and then you build out the volumes of the features from that. But I think the most important thing for the museum was that the accuracy of the uniform and the insignia were all perfect, and the hat. They had a very specific photograph that was behind me all the time, and that was the one that they wanted me to reference in terms of the turn of the head and the angle of the nose and the face. She had such a soft, gentle featured face as a young girl. She's only 18, 19 at that stage. So it's a very gentle sculpture with not a huge amount of mark making. Certainly the one of Charles I've got here is much more heavily mark make, but an older person can handle that. A young person, it ages them unnecessarily. It was just a complete joy from start to finish. I didn't have a problem with it. It was challenging working from 1940s grainy photographs and footage, because unlike our high definition photographs and filming now, the volumes and the sense of light and shadow were really not there. So that was quite challenging. I normally take my own photographs, and certainly one of the angles I didn't have a reference for is actually up the chin to the nose. I'd normally stand beneath my subjects and sculpt from underneath, and I don't think there's any photographs of the Queen from that angle. I think the museum really wanted it from the 1940s, because actually the story behind that uniform is that it's the uniform that she went dancing in the streets in London on the day that they announced that the war in Europe was ended, in the 8th of May, 1945. So it's the uniform that she describes as having to pull her cap down over her eyes to not be noticed, and when she went partying with her sister in the streets. So for me, my son was born on the 8th of May. I'm a military wife. It is an absolute honour to have been commissioned for this. I can't pretend it wasn't expected. She was 96, but at 96 you think, I don't know, I think we all imagined the Queen was going to live a bit longer. It's such a weird world without her in it. It was always meant to be a celebration, and I hope that the public will come and see it as such. Certainly the military community that I'm a part of are really delighted that she's been celebrated at actually the beginning of her service, because we all consider her service of when she became Queen, but she was the first female member of the British monarchy to join the services as a full-time member of the military. So her service started when she was 18, 19. So we think it was only 70 years, and it was not. There's something really beautiful about commemorative sculpture. I mean, obviously the Queen has been commemorated across the globe with many sculptures. I'm certainly not the first, and I'm sure I won't be the last, but I think I'm the only one to do it with this uniform. She's been sculpted in many uniforms, but this is the only one celebrating her pre-Queen service and her relationship that really began, because she, remember, went out to Malta as a military wife. So she's one of us. She's one of our team. And it was really lovely for me as a military wife to sculpt another military wife at the beginning of her time in the military. I hope that when people go to the museum and they see the sculpture, that they take the time to learn her story from the beginning. I think it's there as an assumption that she started service at, when she became the Queen, but she was already a military wife and mother, and her service started earlier. And I think that's what I'd like them to learn about her story. We had planned a huge unveiling and the launch of Chelsea History Week next week. So unfortunately, there's lots of other fantastic events going on that are still going ahead after the funeral, that I'd really recommend people going down to. The museum is fantastic, and it is a source of such joy for many service families. I was actually the last person to be commissioned. There are other sculptures that will be obviously unveiled, and her proper big memorial piece will come out. But I think I was the last person commissioned to sculpt her, and the only person to do her at that age in that uniform. And for me, as a woman, as a mother, as a military wife, that's priceless.
There we are. The sculpture will be displayed throughout Chelsea History Festival, which will run next week from the 20th to the 25th of September. Now, ahead of the weekend of preparations for the Queen's funeral on Monday, Hebe spoke to King's College Politics and Contemporary History professor Andrew Blick about the constitutional and political issues related to the Queen's death, as well as the changes we might see as King Charles III takes over as the new monarch.
Within the UK Constitution, the monarch plays a very important symbolic role, and they're there to provide continuity and provide a focus for public attention, while at the same time being above party politics and being kept away from day-to-day political controversy. In that context, it's really an interesting moment when there's a change in the particular person who actually holds the office, because this is a point where the continuity, in a sense, stops. So the monarchy is there to provide continuity, but obviously when the previous monarch passes on and a new one takes over immediately, this is a break in continuity. So this is an important moment for any monarch, an important moment for the UK monarchy.
And the last week has felt incredibly significant. Do you think that's to do with the fact that she has been a constant in most of our lives, throughout the whole of our lives, and also the impact she had on us, you know, as a country, how loved she was?
It's even more significant because it's been so long since the last time this happened. No one really, very few people have clear memories of the last transition in 1952, when George VI passed away and his daughter became Queen Elizabeth II. There's not really a clear memory of that. So it's very difficult for the public to separate in their minds, or for anyone really, the person who's held the job for so long from the job itself. So it's an important moment, and it's both an opportunity and a challenge for the new monarch, because the new monarch has a chance to move things on a bit in certain ways, to develop things. And we've already heard Charles III talking about how much change there's been in society since the point at which Queen Elizabeth came to the throne in 1952, how different our society is from the way it was then. So clearly Charles will be doing things differently, and that's what one would expect, and will have his own ideas on the role and how to perform it. At the same time, there's a need for continuity in the role, and that's the bit that Charles also has to try and provide, and will be doing that in various ways. Obviously, he's already been talking about the legacy of his mother, how he hopes to continue to serve in the way she did. So that's an interesting challenge. That's the public-facing aspect of the role.
How do you think things are going to change politically as we have this swap from the Queen's reign to King Charles's reign? What do you think that's going to do to the political landscape?
Since a long time past, there's been a principle that the monarch isn't a party political leader, isn't a leader as such, isn't involved in day-to-day political controversy, isn't involved in public disagreements, public disputes. That goes back at least as far as the 19th century, the development of that principle. But at the same time, behind the scenes, monarchs do have a lot of contact with leading politicians. Most obviously, they have a weekly meeting with the Prime Minister while Parliament is sitting. So that's a regular opportunity to talk to the Prime Minister about what's going on. And it's well known that although we didn't hear the details of any of those discussions, that was always kept confidential, we know that the previous monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, and no doubt Charles III kept up on top of the papers, kept on top of what was going on, and could ask some quite searching questions of the Prime Minister as what's going on. And the monarch does have a right to ask questions, to warn, to give advice, to talk to the Prime Minister about what's going on behind the scenes. In the end, it's the Prime Minister's government. In the end, it's the Cabinet's government. It's the elected politicians who answer to Parliament and through Parliament to us about what goes on. But the monarch does have some kind of influence there. And that's where the particular person who's in the job, be it Queen Elizabeth II or now Charles III, has the opportunity to bring some of their own interests to bear. And what Charles III has been clear about is that publicly, it seems he's going to take a step back from some of the causes he was involved with. That's going to be handed on to others. He's made that clear. Charles has a long record of making public statements about things, of being a bit controversial than his mother was being while she was Queen. But now he's been pretty clear he's going to step back away from that, leave it to others. But maybe behind the scenes, there'll still be opportunities for him to raise certain issues, maybe about environmental issues. We also heard quite recently that Charles wasn't happy about aspects of the government's refugee program. Now, I'm not putting words into his mouth. I'm not saying he's going to raise any of these issues, but there are opportunities there behind the scenes, and that's constitutionally considered to be entirely proper, that the monarch can do things behind the scenes. But it's the public stuff that monarchs tend to keep away from, and certainly Elizabeth II was extremely good at keeping out of public controversy, and Charles seems set to try and follow that pattern. But there are behind the scenes opportunities.
There we are, Professor Andrew Blick from King's College London there, chatting to Hebe. OK, let's take a look at the weather now. Good news for anyone planning on spending their weekend in the queue. There's no rain on the radar, dropping as low as 8 degrees overnight though, but it is a sunny start to the day tomorrow and highs of 17 degrees in the afternoon. Looking ahead to Sunday, highs of 17 again, but there is more cloud cover making an appearance. And on Monday, it's much of the same. It's going to be cloudy all day, but a couple of degrees warmer, reaching around 19 degrees. And that's all from the news team this evening. For more coverage, do follow our social channels at London Live.